So my name is Fabrice Nordman. I come from Brussels, which is currently in Belgium, and I'm running a small company called One More Thing. I would like this session not to be a session. That means we're in unconference. So my point is that I have something to show you. It might take like a few minutes, and then I have no idea of how this hour can go to. It can turn into a kind of tutorial, can go into an explanation of the details of the programming. It can go into a debate, because I hope what I'm going to show you is going to bring a lot of ideas. Well, it's entirely up to you. So, just a point of history, a bit, I think it was a year ago, I published an article and a technique was called FMSDIFM, that stands for FileMaker Server Do It For Me. At the time, it was quite widely commented throughout the community, because it was, I think, quite interesting. But we would not give it away. We gave away the principle by explaining how we did things and so on. But we were not distributing any file, any code. Why? Only because it was extremely difficult, I would say, to deploy. So we had deployed for ourselves on our servers and for our customers and so on, but we really didn't want to go into supporting people, because it was really tricky. But there was kind of frustration, because people thought we didn't want to give it or sell it. That was not the case. We just didn't want to run into problems with supporting such a thing. Then from that time, I started working on a free, easily installable version, and that's what I released a few days ago. So some of you might already have had the time to take a look into it. If not, it's not a big deal. So now it's a pure FileMaker thing that you install in your solution. It's just FileMaker scripts and objects and so on. It's really easy. The downside of this is the reason why we had made this complex thing in the first place was it was even easier to use in the solution, right? So now there's a little more things to do in your solutions, but altogether I think it's easier, and at least you can install it in your solution on any server. You don't have to host your solutions on ours, although I highly recommend that. No. So what this technique is about, it's about, and you have to understand that it becomes really interesting because FileMaker 12 product line has evolved in such a way. And all I'm going to show you here was doable before using plugins, which means that it was not working on FileMaker Go, for example, but there was plugin able to call a URL. You had web viewers, and so on. So in a way or another, you could do what I'm going to do, but the server was not powerful enough to imagine doing everything that way. So now the FileMaker Server 12, because it's 64 bits, so you can allocate a lot of RAM, because it handles more connections, because the structure is more exploded into different cores that do not interfere with each other. All this make this strategy much more efficient. So what is it now? Because I said I have for 10 minutes to show it to you, so I already used 6 of them, I think. So what is it about? You've all experienced slow processes on your FileMaker Pro or FileMaker Go client, especially when you work remotely, but not only when you work remotely. It can be also on a LAN network. but especially if you work over one network or from FileMaker Go. Why is this? Because FileMaker client, whether it's Pro and Go, it doesn't really make a difference. And FileMaker Server have to communicate a lot. And they have to, well, if let's say we create a record, right? FileMaker Pro says, okay, I want to create this record with this and this data because you're, let's say, pushing it through a relationship or through import. It has to call FileMaker Server and say, hey, I want to create a record with this and this data. Okay, the server says, okay, I'm going to do that. Then first, I must create the record. I must push the data you told me to insert. I must run all the auto enters and all the calculation that must be done at on the creation of that record. I must notify all other users of the solution that, hey, there's a new record created. You should update your total record count, things like that. Okay? It has, of course, to index that, so to know where the record should be displayed, in what order. For example, if another user is viewing a sorted portal, for example, it has to do a lot of things. And then if you want to create a new record, because you're in a loop of record creation, all this process has to go through again. So it's a lot of communication between the client and the server. The idea here is, okay, why not do everything, all the heavy process on the server? And this is basically what it does. So I'm going to show you, and I would ask you, please do not use too much your internet connection for a few minutes. So we have a, I'm hesitating. Do I show it to you on the iPad? No, it might take too long. I'm going to show it to you on Pro. This is the file you can download from the website. So it's all open. You can go copy paste and set. Basically, it compares two ways of working. Okay, it's the easiest database you've ever seen. It's a single table. I can show it to you. Well, there are two tables, but I explained the second one later. Well, there's just one table on which we're going to create records. It has one auto-enter field. All the others are globals. Okay, there's no relationship except some global relationship that I will explain later, but it's really easy, right? The server, the file is hosted on a server in Brussels. It's a very fast server. It's a production server. And on the left, I have buttons that trigger scripts that, create records or delete records the standard way, like a loop. Just new record for 3 times or 100 times. So on the right-hand side, I have this technique. So now let's do this little test. I'm creating 3 records. It takes half a second. Okay, I'm going to create 100. This is, of course, what you can do as soon as you download the file and install it on your server. Okay, here we're just creating 100 records. Ooh. If I do the same on the iPad, it takes about 4 to 10 times longer, right? So you end up with 2 minutes for creating 100 records. Do you really want me to create 1,000? Yeah, let's do that. Okay, yes, now I have time to talk. So, as you see, if we create 1,000 records locally, it's going to be a snap. You're not even going to notice it. As soon as you work on a one network, it goes like that. It's crazy. Okay, which makes it FileMaker completely out of the game for a really worldwide deployment, for example. Okay, except if you use web publishing. Did you ever notice that since the 90s, we have this instant web publishing that just runs extremely fast wherever you are. So, so basically, this is the only idea, that we are going to use the web publishing engine to call a script that will be run server-side. Okay? So, this is the way it works. Remember the new features of FileMaker 12, apart from the ones of the server I already mentioned. You have the possibility to insert a URL, okay, which you could do with WebViewer already, but it was quite tricky to control when the WebViewer was really going to do something or not, and especially you could not wait for the result, right? It was asynchronous. Now you can, in a script, insert from URL, and then you know the script is going to wait for the result, for the reply of the server. Okay, it makes a big difference.
Does that problem have any problems if you sort of connectivity issues?
Yes, there's for me a bug with this insert from URL feature is that there's no timeout. You cannot set up a timeout. So if by chance the connection fails during this instruction, you have a never-ending progress bar, and you have to kill your FileMaker application. But as you will see, the process is so much shorter that it's only a theoretical case. Okay, 1,000 records created, 140 seconds. Okay, and now the last test is going simply to show all, delete all records. And here you can see, you can observe that not only have you a huge time, but you also have this progress bar, which you cannot turn off or hide. You're not in control. Okay? Yeah, so all these, if you do it the classic way, I mean the standard way, it means that you have to work in the context. Okay, you know, you have to be on the layout where you create records. You have to, or where you delete. So 40 seconds to delete 1,100 record, right? So you have to work in context. So, well, I'll come to this later. Sorry, Anza, I hope you can edit something. But okay, so now we have no records anymore in the database. I can show this to you, 0 records, okay? I'm going to do just the same things using this technique. So create 3 records. Oh, it took a little bit longer. That's what happens usually during the first call. Just the first call is a little bit longer. Now the second call, you see, it's basically the same time. For 3 records, it doesn't really make a difference. Now let's create 100 records. It takes half a second. So it's likely the same time as the 3 records, right? 1,000 records. Oh, not now. Okay, 1,000 records took 3 times as long, 1.5 seconds, which is quite a difference. And then I'm going to delete all. Okay? So you see, it's not a small optimization. It's a major thing. Yes. It means in French it's magical. So it's not a major, it's not a small improvement. It's a game changer completely, really. And I said no, customers.
Saying where did all my records go?
No, well, I mean, of course, it's a game changer in terms of performance. That was the reason why I followed that road, to improve performance, right? But in fact, it's not the most important thing in the end. In the end, the most important thing is that you can write your scripts context-free, without ever having to think about the context. It means here we are in a layout representing the data table. Right, so we just create a loop and we create records. That's not an issue. But now if we are in decontextualized, we are on a layout representing another table, right, which you don't see. You just have to believe me. We are, if I look at the relationship graph, we are now here on a dummy context, right? We're not on the context of the data table. It doesn't make a difference because you're going to call the server and say, hey, create 1,000 records in the data table. It doesn't care where you are. So if you look at your scripts, how they are now, you will be surprised, even if you have a clue about it. But you will be, I can guarantee you will be astonished to see how much of your code is just managing what the user sees. What layout do you go through, what tab panels you store, restore, what freeze window, refresh window, all these things you're doing. It's amazing. It's a huge part of your code. While, in fact, all you want to do is manipulate data and, in the end, give a feedback to the user. That is, the feedback can be, okay, go to a layout, or show a tab panel, or, as we did in this example, display a dialog, or anything, okay? But if you do it the standard way, which is so tied to the context, you have to manage both things at the same time. So you go to this is why you open off-screen windows, you minimize things, we have all these kind of tricks that are really so taking so much energy, bugs, and so on. You have the script triggers to disable because you're changing layout. All this stuff, it's amazingly complex. While in the end, what you want to do is modify data and give the user a feedback. And that's all you want to do. So, working that way, you are really in a client-server environment. Like if you have some skills in web development, it's just like if you are doing a PHP page. Okay, the PHP presents a page, it creates an HTML page, then the user can use that, send back to the server, and the server sends a new page. Okay, that's the way server-side languages work. So now I'm just going to, well, my plan at least was just to give you a very, very short description on the code, and then that we have a discussion about it. Actually, this implementation you can download goes a little bit further because it proposes also a way of implementing security and the way we create records to communicate with the server. I'm going to go a little bit into details, but you don't have to follow all that. You can think of other way of doing the same thing, really. So now, let's take a look at how the scripts are. Yes, I was mentioning the features that FileMaker 12 brings that makes this much easier to do. First, there's the insert from URL I already talked about. Okay, you can call it a web server directly from your script. And the second thing, it looks like a detail, but it's nice. It's the fact that you can hide objects on the right. Because you have to insert. Insert needs a field on the layout. Wonder why in 2013, but still it's the way it works. So you have to have a field here. Okay? So before you had to have a 1 pixel by 1 pixel field somewhere hidden. Now you can do things nicely. Okay? First, a general idea of how it works. I'm going to show you here the classic script. I guess there is no surprise here. We do some checks, some controls or whatever. And we go to a layout and we loop and we create records, and then in the end we show a custom dialog. Okay? This is the slow, usual way of doing things, right? in the new way of doing things, create n records, so it's the same thing. Here it is. So we do the same checks. Are you allowed to do that? Do you want to? Well, and then we perform the script. It's always the same script in this implementation again, which is called FMSDIFM client. Okay, that's a script that's going to run on the client side. And we send it a parameter, and again you can structure, we usually don't structure our parameters that way, but we use XML, but it doesn't matter. You can work just the way you used to work. So in this case, we give an action, create records, and the parameter we received, the real parameter, okay? Yeah. And then what this script does is, so it's always the same script, whether you're deleting, creating, any action you want to delegate to the server, you're calling the same script on the client. And it's the script. So what does it do? It's the longest script. So the first part, which is the major part in fact, is not directly linked to the system. It's a way of creating related records without changing context. This is why we have this relationship. Okay, we create a record in a table called FMSDIFM for the sake of unicity, but it's technically it's a request table. Okay, in there we're going to pass the parameter. We're going to tell, hey, the server, I created a record for you that contains just what we saw. Create record with the parameter. That might be a number in that case, right? And so the first part is of the script is about creating the related record, right? There's an exception if we use this technique, is that if there is no record in the current table, we cannot create a related record, so we have to go in the context. But that's a detail. Then we get the record ID, which is the request ID, okay, of the record we just created. Okay, so everything we get is a ID. And here, I'll come back to this later. This is the debug mode for our system. And then what we do here, we run again, this is only an implementation. We run a script called settings that gives us, the authentication credential for an account. It's just about managing security, but you can think of things. You can think security a different way. We try to be very, very careful on this implementation. And then all this ends up in building a URL, okay, that can you read on screen like that?
Can you zoom in a bit?
So in fact, yes, we are going to authenticate here. This is the authentication. Okay. This is the authentication. Well, I don't want to go too much into details about security. You will explore the file. And we are going to connect to the server, which is the same as the one hosting the file. And we are going to send XML request. So we pass the file name. We have to have a layout called FMSDIFM. And that script, and we are going to trigger that script with the XML interface, which is called FMSDIFM execute. And as a parameter, we send only one piece of information, which is the ID of the request that was created. Okay, it's like a token, in fact. All right. So we created a record, we get the ID, we say, hey, server, I created a record for you with ID 123. Please do that script with that parameter, and that's it. And then we go to this hidden object. This is everywhere. It's a global field, so you can just copy paste it. It's context independent, and you insert this URL. Okay. From this moment, the script is called on server. Something is happening on server, and so on. We go into detail later. And at the end, it returns a result in this field, right? Some XML. And then we do some parsing for you here. Sometimes we have errors, and sometimes we have the proper result. If that is the case, we parse it a little more and send back the result to your original script, okay, which you can use. This is how you can show the custom dialog or do whatever you want depending on the result, right? Which you could not do if you were using web viewers before, because you were never sure that the result was given back, right? This is synchronous. It waits until there is an answer, there is a reply. It doesn't wait for long, as you saw. And then the server-side thing does this. Okay, it receives a request, so it's triggered. So now it's going to run. First, the session is logged in with very, very small permission, privilege set that allows just nothing. So first thing it does is reconnecting with a higher privilege set, and you can reconnect to all your files if you want. And then it goes to the FMSD IFM, it retrieves the request, okay? It's by a simple find. Sometimes they say, oh, there is more than one or there is none, so this is invalid, returns this result. Okay, this is an error. Never happened, I think. But another case I thought was nice would be to have a timeout. Say it's not normal if you're coming with a request ID that's was created like a day ago. It's not. This should not be run. So we set it to a minute, but sometimes it's a bit short when you want to go to debugger. But anyway, you can adjust that. And in the end, it does that. So it finds the record, and it runs another script which is called dispatcher, which you have to adapt. And at the end, and the dispatcher is the script when you do your actions, you know. First you parse your parameter. In this case, it's carriage return delimited, but if you use XML as we do, you just have to adapt this just to get the proper parameters. It's easy. And then, well, if it's create records, I will run this script with this parameter, right? And then I send back the result. So here is the script that will be adapted for each new action you want to add. You have to create a new if statement. Well, in this implementation, again, you could call directly from the beginning, you could call directly the script you want, but then you're dependent on naming, on how the results are sent, and so on. And you have to reproduce a lot of code. And I think that's it. Okay, so your normal script, the create records, just calls another script on the client that builds a URL, calls the server. The server has a script called execute and says, okay, I'll retrieve the query. Okay, it tells me to do this and that. Then I run a script that it's called dispatcher. This script dispatcher just chooses the correct script to perform, and in the end we send the result to the client, right? So again, all this is an implementation. It might sound a little complex because we could have been much more straightforward. In fact, it's very convenient because you never have to rewrite code. You just have to adapt your script. So I see scripts as if you of course the The work it demands is more to adapt your own script. Okay, this is what you have to do. That takes the longest time. But if you start working that way, scripts get much, much, much easier to structure, right? Basically, we have we think of the script as a three-part thing, which is first the checksum, beginning, what? Are you allowed to perform? Are there any record in the table? Well, all this kind of checks that you might want to do depending on business logic and so on. Then there is the data manipulation, or really what the script does. And then there are all the outputs, which is what is the user going to see in the end? Do we need to print something? Do we need to show dialogue or that stuff? Okay, so both the first and the last part are to be performed on the client. There's no other way. You don't want to print, even if it was possible, you wouldn't want to print on the server. Yeah, but it's not possible, so it doesn't. So if you can structure your script that way, then the central part is the one you want to push to run on the server. It's quite easy, and the script becomes like really crystal clear. Okay, you're not constantly going to a layout, well, as I already explained earlier. Okay, well, some other advantages of that technique is that you can, of course, you would have just the same performance if I was running on Go. It would be slower in the classical way, but it would be just the same performance for the FMSDIFM, because it's all run on server. So it's very important for FileMaker Go. Other benefits are that you can use plugins server-side using FileMaker Go. Because, well, if the server is compatible with server, if the plugin is compatible with server, nothing prevents you from using it from FileMaker Go. That's it. It's about the main advantages and so on.
Sort of one complexity that I sort of see would be handling errors and returning the errors back to the user in a way that is sensible. Sort of if you're creating records or deleting records, then it's pretty straightforward. But if you're updating things or running any processes that need to deal with, if you run into any, say, multi-user locks, that kind of thing, sort of passing that back up the chain and over to the user.
Well, so first thing is these kind of problems like user conflicts, so on, are of course diminished by far because the processes are so much shorter that the probability is just reduced by a tremendous factor. So that's the first thing. The second thing is it doesn't change a thing. You can just give the feedback exactly as you do normally. Right? If you choose to interrupt your script because it shouldn't go any further if it meets such an error, and give a feedback to the user, right? It's just exactly the same. You have to, of course, you have to use stripped results. In case you are not used to, well, anyway, you should. So, but no, there's really no difference except that you have to make your, but your script kind of naturally become simple. And, you know, so it's not like you have an effort to make. It's, of course, if you have now in your solution a script that is, you know, taller than me. I'm not very tall, but you know what I mean. And it might be, it might seem like it's going to be very difficult to make it as simple as that. But truly, spend the time, you'll see it's going to be done in no time. That, I promise.
What I often see is that with a huge number of scripts, if you reduce it, like you say, if you look at the three parts, sort of preparing, error checking, preparing, and then doing the actual processing, often the actual processing is quite simple, whereas the complex part is making sure you're getting the correct data in, that type of thing.
But, yeah, but what is really slow really some modification. And the calculation engine is fine on Go or on Pro. It's working fine. I mean, if you want to declare a variable on an index field, I mean, if you're not doing a calc here, you know, summarizing the whole database, it's fast. So usually what you want to do in this header part is check if your extended privileges allow this kind of script. If you, I don't know, if the business rules allow, you know, I don't know if this client must be invoiced or not. If not, you don't invoice it, or you know, it's very, these checks are very. They can perfectly be run on the client side. It would be kind of overkill to, even for such small things, to go to server. As soon as you manipulate data, oh, and yes, of course, yeah, I'll come back to. There is another huge benefit that I forgot to mention. Is when you're on Go. And especially on the phone, your customer can call you at any time. Then you lose your connection. You lose, you know, you can run out of battery. You can run out of connection. You can run out. Someone can call you. Then FileMaker go to hibernation. Then the script you were running is stopped. Maybe some of you are not aware of that, but this is very important. If you're running a loop on FileMaker Go, you receive a call, which obviously you cannot control, as you saw. Anyone can call you at any time. You're simply having a script failing in the middle of nowhere. You don't know what record were processed, what were not, and so on. Here, by calling the server, at least you know that this script was performed entirely, because it's run on Serverside. Okay.
To what extent have you? To what extent have you implemented this yourself in a solution? Not just creating records and deleting them, but how many other kinds of scenarios have you?
We've been using this for a year, about, I think. So yeah, basically, where we experience slowdowns, which is when you manipulate data, or where you get data from external sources. Well, things like that. Or, of course, on tasks like you mentioned yesterday, when you want to update, but this is all related to data, when you want to update a bunch of records because you change something in the parent record, you want to update the child records and so on. All this can be done that way. For example, we have a solution that runs mostly on Go, and yeah, it creates order lines, right? But each order line must have sub-lines, right? In another table with options and so on. That must be, and it takes even if it's not a huge number of records to create. You know, you have to find the correct. You have to find the good reference that you. Well, it takes a time. It takes like it's a script that took something like 1 second. You know, a small second to execute. If you're doing this all day, you get mad, right? So, having reducing the speed, the time from a big second or a second to something you can't even feel, it makes a huge difference, right? So it can be also for. I mean, it's as Hansa will probably explain, optimization is first thing you're using all the time. That's more important. You can afford wasting an hour once a month. It doesn't matter if you waste half a second hundreds times a day. It just drives you nuts. First, yeah.
There seems to be something which does not really fit. I see the results, but since the first thing is it's obvious for everything that looks like batch processing, like creating 100 records, but that is not usually the main task of mobile solutions, creating 100 records all the time. And data transfer and manipulating data, there's at least this exchange table where I put the data that should be inserted somewhere else. But that is done the classical way, or not? Because this is how the parameters are transferred. This communication table where you insert.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah, okay.
So there's at least this one table that I share with everyone, where I do the insert, where
Yes.
I do have the updates and
Yes,
things.
but
So if I do that for one record to be created in another table,
yes.
is there still a...
No, I agree. If you're only creating one record on the local table, no, there's no point. I agree with that. Now, if you're creating a record that will have many auto enters to, to data to get from far away in the database, or that take time, it might even be worse for one record. It all depends.
Then the next thing is, you mentioned that crazy thing with FileMaker on the mobile systems or on the server. Something happens, script stops where it is.
Yes.
So signaling the state, finding my way back, that is always the big problem. So if that happens on Go, I can, when I wake up from hibernation, I can check what's in that table, and always see there is not confirmation. So I know the script has not run, at least not to the end. But if I started again, it could have been so that on the server it had finished. I just did not get the result back.
That is true.
It gets a little bit more complex.
Yeah, well, that is true, but it depends what kind of feedback you expect. I mean,
At least I want to know if the script run to the end or not.
yeah, but then if you want to be that explicit, you can have it in the interface, for example. It can be, I don't know, for conditional formatting. Okay.
From the logic.
Yeah,
I
but
must have some clue if the changes that were necessary.
yeah, I agree. But this is,
I run the script. Did they go through or not?
I agree. This doesn't solve by itself. It doesn't solve this issue of knowing. Yeah. In fact, you know that if the script was called, it's very likely that it was run on the server, more likely than if you were running it locally. I mean, if you run it locally.
Exists also if I don't use that technique, of course.
Yes. So
This is another problem here, because this is an asynchronic approach to the whole thing, but you can add things to that, like creating a ticket, a unique ID, and you send it with your request to the server. And when you send it a second time, the server can check that ID, UID, and recognize, oh, you already sent that, so I don't have to recreate it. So you can work around that. I think it's just a technique.
yeah,
As explained here. So
It's just one more that complexity as it.
sure, but you can encapsulate it. So I like the approach that you start programming in a modular way, so that your context is not defining your programming. You create a script that you can use them more often as a modular system. So you take a brick here and there and put it together in your script. But of course, this is only working with the data modification program stats. Everything else, where you display something on the client side, you still have to do it on the client side. But
that's quite logical.
yeah, and that's the thing. You have to probably have a different approach, but I always try to do it on my client side in the same way to keep it modular, having script that I can call with some script parameters and reuse them in different contexts there. So I like the idea. I see what Volker is saying. Okay, it doesn't work if you just create one record. It doesn't make sense to send it to the server because there's no big advantage for that. And programming in an asynchronic way, you have to manage additional things to keep it in the loop there. But I like the idea, just the concept, to think about it. If you have a timing problem, think about this idea. Maybe it can help you there. To pass some of the script to the server side.
There are some differences I didn't mention when you write a script to run server side. It's of course it's a new session, right? So the server side script cannot use the global fields or variables that were declared on the client side. So you have to pass these as parameters. Same thing at least in the way we implemented security, the server-side account does not know the user account name or username or IP addresses. So if you want to use those, by default, we put already in this request table, we put the account name, so you can use it in your server-side script easily. But it means that you have to record these information another way. For example, if you want to keep track of what account created, and you want to know the user account, not the server-side account, then you have to have a field that you have to set this field. You cannot just use the auto-enter get user account, because then it will return the server-side account. Well, this is only for this implementation of security, of course.
You can always use a session record or a session table,
Yeah, exactly.
and you set all your variables and stuff in that session record, and in the beginning of the server.
Absolutely, yeah. This is what we do, but for the sake of simplicity, we just push the account name. But I mean, if you use in your auto-enters account name, then it's not going to give you the result you expect. So you have to use that kind of things.
Well, if you have some validation, if you create a record and the session is ended because of a phone call or whatever, you can do a reverse call, but if you want to revert the record, you need some kind of system that communicates, that doesn't communicate.
Yeah, but well, it's always the same thing. I would say it doesn't solve anything on the client side. Everything can still happen, and there's this hibernation problems that we all have. So it doesn't solve it by itself.
No, but if you create a record,
Yes.
Everything goes well, you send parameters back to the client isn't receiving it. Could you send a status in the beginning to revert the record anyway, unless the client is responding back? Is that a way to go?
To refer to record? I'm not sure.
You create a record,
Yes.
for instance, and,
Yeah.
and you've got validation, the user needs to set.
Okay.
If you did that,
Right.
you need to set a delivery date or whatever.
Okay.
But the client is gone. So if you set a flag to remove that record anyway, always, unless the client responds, okay, the record is created, I can now go on and validate.
Right, but this, I would say this is more a business logic thing. Like maybe you want to have a server-side schedule script this time that deletes all records that were not validated or things like that. It's more a business logic, but I mean, you just think of it as a server-side environment. So if you expect some new communication from the client, then you have just to be prepared for that. I mean, the client is only going to call a new URL and to trigger a new script. That's it. So it's you to adapt your logic to that. Yes.
Can you give just one or two examples where you use this in practice? As we heard, doesn't make very much sense to if you just want to create one record.
No, that's true. No, it's you know
So where do you use it?
mostly when I think a script takes too long.
Okay.
But when I think it takes too long, or it's used all the time, or okay, it also solves some situations where customers wanted synchronization solution, like mirror sync or the other one. I've heard it so much that I forgot its name. GoSync. Okay, which are products that fit in many situations where you know you don't have a connection, but in many environments, in fact, you do know that you are going to work on a local network. Talking about, say, a hospital or where there is a Wi-Fi network. Okay, simply the performances are such that from the beginning, when we received FileMaker Go for the first time, said, oh, we need to find a way to synchronize data because it's too slow if you work remotely. So they developed these systems that are fine if you are really working remotely. If you really need to take an embedded version of the database on your device, but in many circumstances, it's only performance that make people choose these kind of product. In this environment I show you is you're just using, you're just using, as you have always been using, the same centralized database. Okay, there's no synchronization or anything. It's just the way you work usually, except it goes faster. Yeah, that was just a question here.
In case you use a separation model, and if you imagine that you actually have the interface and script file on the iPad, and then you have the data on the server.
Absolutely.
Could you have a copy of that same
Interface file on server.
interface file on the server and then call it up there? So
Exactly.
So you work that way.
That's what we do.
And have you, that's another topic, experience performance that's running better when you have the interface file locally?
Oh yeah, that's obvious. If you have the interface file locally, it's so much faster.
I'd like to know whether this interferes with server-side scripts running already. I've sometimes statistics scripts that run all day in say half an hour frequency and take 5 minutes. Do this script interfere with this?
No, first when you trigger that, it's going to open a new session for custom web publishing, right? Not for server-side script, okay? Which also important when you choose the compatibility check, right? You have to use only custom web publishing steps. If you use this implementation, in fact, it's not going to create a new user. So you have only one user because everyone uses the same account. So you're not going to see many users. So it does not interfere with server-side scheduled script. And so far, we didn't run into situations where we could notice any downgrade of the server performance, because the great point is that processes are so fast. They don't take long. So because they're so short, it's even difficult to test than to be in the situation when you have really multiple calls at the same time. A feature that I would like FileMaker to give us one day is an explicit way of closing a session by script. Right? Sometimes, if you initiate a session, it will last on the server. You will see this client logged until it's disconnected, which is, I think, a timeout of 15 minutes or 5 minutes. 5 minutes. I don't remember exactly. I would be much at ease if in the script I could say, okay, end session.
On the web publishing engine, you can quit. That kills the session.
Yeah, but you have to on the server interface. I'd like to be able to do it on the client from the script itself.
Yes, or even from the server admin console, you can't quit the server-side script. Once it's started,
Yeah, you can if you go to the client and disconnect the client, and if it works, which is a kind of.
When the server is running a server-side script, there's no client you can go to.
Yes, it is. The script name is in the.
Then you disconnect the client, and if you're lucky, it works. It means if you're not running the console on Windows. No, run the console on the Mac, even if it's a Windows server. It's much more efficient.
How many concurrent users do you have on the systems, and how many of them do use this in a parallel way?
To be honest, we have no experience of having several hundreds of users using this at the same time, because simply of the size of the solutions we've deployed so far. But if you take a reasonable number of, testable thing, well, you see there's no difference. There's only one account that is connected with this implementation of security. Okay, it's always one account, and it's having very little activity. So, of course, it's everyone is.
And if you use now an environment with many users,
Yes.
this will lessen the impact. It's not coming more than before.
No, it can only be less. If you think of all the things a server have to do when you work from a remote FileMaker Pro, it can only improve. Okay, the only thing is that if you look at documentation, FileMaker Server announces, well, for the advanced, it's unlimited number of connections using FileMaker Pro, and it's only 200 using the web publishing, right? So in theory, that might be a problem, except you never reach that number because you have only one client technically connected, right? Well,
And also, you do need the FileMaker Server Advanced in order to run this.
no, server is enough.
Okay,
It's using the XML interface.
okay.
No, server is enough, but you have to have a server.
Right. Yeah, of course. Right, you're not using it.
It's kind of related to this, not directly, but I guess what we've seen is that custom web publishing behaving as if the scripts are single-threaded. We've sort of seen connections queuing up. If we've got a long-running script, they others seem to queue up behind it. So it's acting as if that's single-threaded.
No, but that's the major change I forgot to mention in FileMaker Server 12, is the way the web publishing engine is distributing the tasks. Because what it was doing before, frankly, I would not go. It's because FileMaker Server has so many capabilities that I think now this is why it's using this. Before, basically, FileMaker Server was taking all requests and say, okay, how much resources do I have, RAM and disk space and so on. Okay, I have, let's say, 100 of each, and I have 200 connections, so I give half. Okay, it was dividing the resources by the number of users, which means that below a certain threshold, no request can be treated anymore because there is not enough resources. It was locking everyone. Okay, so that's what you experienced. Sometimes like 10 users coming through the web, triggering scripts. It was taking so much resources that no one was able to finish. So the queue was growing, the resources were diminishing, and well, the server was stalling completely. Now it's different. It's first in, first out. So it makes a lot of difference.
Actually, that explains several things that happened with one solution when we moved from 11 to 12.
And it got better.
No, actually, it got worse initially.
Okay.
Because, anyway, about that.
But there's an exception to that rule, just in the case where you're running scripts, which is what we do now, and then the rules is more complex, and I don't know exactly. Sometimes they go first in, first out, and sometimes they choose the old way. I don't know why.
I wish FileMaker would document this kind of stuff really fully.
We all wish.
Yes.
Yeah.
In your experience, did you find some other way to use this technique, for example, to speed up the performance of the sorting, the records?
Oh, sorting is an issue. Okay, yeah, about what you were saying yesterday, fines. Fines on related records are much slower than find on local table, even if the record is indexed, we agree. Even if the fields are indexed. But they are much faster on the local machine than on a remote. Did you notice this? So it's a major difference. So a way of finding those related records is just asking the server, can you give me the list of the records I need to find? So I don't perform the find locally. I ask the server, hey, perform this find, just send me the list of IDs. Then I grab this list of IDs, put it into a global field, and go to related records, which is very fast, okay? So this solves the find slowdowns to a certain extent. Of course, it doesn't solve it for unstored calcs and so on. It improves it, but it doesn't solve really. As for the indexed related record, I mean, it makes it very reasonable. For the sort now, the sort, whatever you do, has to be done on client, which is so stupid. But no, there's no way. Even you can use snapshots. Snapshots contain the sort order, so you can communicate snapshots through between the server and you can do everything you want. The sort in the end will be performed on the client side, which is really stupid. And which is not the case through if you use sorted relationship, because of course the server already gives the sort order. So why don't they? Yeah, okay. No.
Have you ever compared this technique to what has now become FMRPC, remote procedure calls?
I haven't got the chance to see it. I saw the file was just looking exactly like this one. I was quite surprised actually. Well, I don't know. I have no further comment to make. No, I was quite surprised. It really looks like it's just the same thing, but I'm not sure exactly. So, do you have maybe, I don't know, ideas, things?
Yeah. What in detail is needed to run this technique on the server? What details on the server side is needed?
Turn on the XML web sharing, and ensure that it's available from outside or from your network, and that's it.
A web server running.
Just a web server running. Yes.
It's important.
Yeah, of course, but it comes.
That is
Yeah.
an additional request that you have.
No, but yes, but you can turn it on during the server deployment, right? The FileMaker Server deployment. It has its own thing. You just have to turn on the XML web sharing, and that's it. And this, which was not the case in the other implementation that we released a year ago. Another thing is you think of what you can do with plugins, like using SQL plugins from FileMaker Go. It's amazing what you can do. Like for example, all this silly part of the code I show you where we create a related record. If only we could insert into using SQL, there would not even be that complexity here. So, but we don't have it on Go. But once you run this technique, then you can use DoSQL or any server compatible plugin. You can run script master stuff on the server. It's huge what you can do, really. Yes.
Is this technique available for free or?
Yes. Right. Yeah, it's now on our website. So if you go to onemorething.com/fmsdifm, you just download the file. It's the page also tries to explain everything that must be done. I mean, if I forgot something, don't forget to tell me. Feel free to tweet about it or make a little publicity, especially now this other product comes and which seems paying. I don't know. This one is free.
You had this interesting talk yesterday about your problems of doing all this. Could this be usable in your situation?
Yeah, in that situation, it definitely. This technique would have made a massive. The optimization thing.
Maybe you wouldn't.
And it would have made an enormous difference.
No, it's enormous. I mean, it's huge. I mean, the numbers you saw. Think of the numbers I showed you in the beginning, the comparison, and imagine that this is a flat, empty table. There's no calculation at all, nothing, no dependency. So as soon as it becomes a real life database, the differences are huge, huge.
And, I mean, that was a scenario where we're talking about sort of something on a local area network. And given the number of records, the number of users, and the sorts, handing it off to the
Yeah, I
server
mean,
and letting
yes,
the server
it's-
deal with that in one place.
And don't forget that even on the LAN network, you will observe performance differences,
Yes.
but the bottlenecks of your scripts are usually about interface. Don't forget that. Refresh window, oh, this summary field that doesn't update, let's push it, let's force it to refresh, and so on and so on. This, you don't have to do with this technique. You just have to manage the final view. The final thing the user must see, but not the intermediate steps and so on.
Certainly, yeah, because in my case yesterday, the bottleneck really was updating the record on the server and then pushing the cache out to refreshing the cache for effectively every user on the network, which is that's a massive problem, and that would go away with this technique.
No, the cache still has to be pushed.
Your way of working, because all the others will still have a cache to be refreshed. It's just the first step.
Yes, but it's just...
So the whole thing has to be rethought.
Oh yes, certainly.
No, but it's sending things. The sending part of the notifications is not changed, I guess. But the time it takes to check if the record is logged by another user or things like that is much faster. So altogether, yes, you'll notice a tremendous change. It's even in a LAN network.
I was wondering about this thing. Imagine if you use, for insert, an SQL plugin. Wouldn't this lead to a problem in data broadcasting because you're inserting outside the broadcasting mechanism of the FileMaker server? So it could happen
Why?
that you are inserting via SQL into the database,
But you can already.
Yes, but the broadcast does work if you perform it on the server. The client are aware that you are inserting records via SQL.
But they are anyway. I mean, in the end, it's always FileMaker Server that creates new records, whether you are using the FQL interface or the...
I don't know.
Yeah, no. As soon as a record is created, yeah, there's still, I can show you, there are still small funny issues with those notifications, like, which I can't fix, huh? But look, I'm going to create, if the connection is still valid, yes, wonderful. Look, I have here, oh, I'm in the other context. I will go here. You see I have 1,000 records, right? And look at that. I will delete all and go immediately, well, no, first look, yeah. So, you see the record count is going down slowly. And even, I recreate them, okay? And now I will delete them and immediately go to the database definition. Look. Okay, why does it take so long? Hey. No, but it's, oh yeah, I know, because I know. It's using the classic way because I had the modifier key pressed. I have to explain this to you. Okay, yeah, because, well, it's doing it. Because a downside is that a part of a script is running on server, which makes it much more difficult to debug, right? When you are debugging. I know some of you don't make bugs, but some other do. So sometimes you need to debug your script. And while it's running on server, you don't have a debugger, right? Which is a problem. So you can ignore the bugs. That's one of the solutions you proposed yesterday. I was quite fond of it. I wanted. I find it interesting. Yes. And then, no, but then what we propose is when you hold a shift key, instead of being performed on server, we're going to open a new window next to this one, and the script will run locally, normally. Okay? So we have, let me show you, we have in this FMS DIFM client side, we have here a debug mode, right? And instead of calling the URL and doing that stuff on server, it's just going to do exactly the same thing, but in a new window on client, so you can debug your script. That's it. Okay. So I recreate 1,000 records. I delete them. Hey, come on. No, don't tell me. I did it again. I'm sorry. Ah! Well, what I wanted to show you, I'm sorry, is that if you delete a record, they are instantly deleted. And if you go back to the database, there are still 1,000 records. Because the notification of deletion is not yet arrived on the client side. Then only if you close the database definition, reopen it, then you see there is 0 records. This is a FileMaker. This is why this deletion is so slow. I mean, it's one of the reasons. Do you know any other database system where deleting a record takes so long? No, it's crazy, huh? Well, first that's because the records are stored on the disk, so it has to really delete bits on the disk, but also this notification system is so slow. So let me, last attempt. I don't press shift. I did it all, and then I go to database definition, and this time it had time. Okay, well, anyway, that's the demo failure. That's all. Okay, yes, that was a...
Deleting records could be that it also has to delete the records on each temp file for each user.
I don't care. I just want to delete. I don't want it to be...
It's all deleted, but not in every other user's temp file.
Yes, I know.
Yet updated.
Yeah. Even if you're a single user on a local disk, I mean, it's okay. Why change a file format if it's still to take minutes and hours to delete records?
Yes. One question was about deleting records if you use a cascading delete, so you don't delete in the context you're on, but you have a deletion that is a consequence of what you're deleting. Wouldn't that be faster?
Actually, that's the way we delete records now. We have a TOG, group of table occurrences, that we use for 2 purposes. For SQL queries, we named them after the table name. Okay, so the queries are easier to write, and we have a table. It's a completely separate matter, in fact, but we have a table called deletion. Okay, and what we do is when we want to, and this table has a field when we can list IDs. All right. And it's related to all other with a deletion link. So if you delete the records in this table, it deletes in all other table of the solution, right? And then what we do, we create a record in that, of course we do this server side. This is one of the things we do server side. We simply create a dummy record in this table, paste the list of IDs of records we want to delete, because we're using UIDs everywhere, not serial numbers. Then when we delete this record, all the related records are deleted. That's the way we delete records now. Yes. Of course, if you do it server side, it's fast. So I don't know how long we have. Honza has, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I could talk to you longer. If you have a very long scripts to optimize, we can even have later on, let's say a tutorial session where we try to implement this to your solution, try to see how one of your scripts can be optimized, and we can do it that way.
Concerning your security model, can you explain it a little?
What?
Concerning the security model, can you explain a little?
Oh yeah, okay. So again, this is purely a proposal for implementing security. You can. So if we go to security, we have several accounts. You have the user accounts, of course. In that case, you have only the admin full access thing, but and then we created 2 accounts with 2 privilege sets, right? This one is very, very low privilege. If we go to privilege sets, connect, you see it can only access through XML, and it cannot access value lists. It can access only 2 scripts, right? It can only view this transaction table, right? It can do nothing. But then the first thing it does, after logging in, it's say, okay, I'm logged in the proper way. It means that the request was correctly sent. So it re-authenticates. You remember there's a script that re-authenticates as this user, which does everything. Of course, it does not modify layouts of value list because it's a script server. Remember, you can't modify a value list or a script. Right. So, but basically, it can do everything else, and it can, of course, connect through XML. And well, that's it. So, what happens is. Yeah, okay. What happens is that when the server-side script starts to run, it has this low privilege. It runs a script that re-authenticates in this file, and if you have multiple files, you should just copy this re-authenticate script as well as the accounts, of course, in the other files, and then it does the script. And here also we declare a variable, global variable, so you can use it throughout your server-side script, just containing the account name of the real user. Right. That's just to help, because we are pushing it to this FMSDIFM table. Okay. So is it clear enough? Yeah, the other thing I didn't mention in this implementation, so the FMSDIFM table has these fields. So this is the field you want to insert on you want to put on your layout, where you're going to insert and get the result back. The creation account, so this is the one we just talked about. Modification account is just interesting for you just to see if the record was modified with the account FMSDIFM, which is supposed to do. Then there is the request itself, which is text field, the result, and then we track when the request was created, when it was retrieved, and when it was when a response was given. Okay, so this allows you to see if something is going is having a problem. In fact, there's never a problem. Once you set up your server with correct XML interface and that you've set up your accounts, it never fails. And that's it. And this is the main idea. Okay. And how do we create records? Again, this is an implementation. The idea is that we don't want to change layout to create a record because we want to get rid of context dependence. So it's simply we have a global field in all tables. We called it Omega FMSDIFM, so it's at the end of the list, but you can name it just the way you want. No, the script is a bit naming dependent. Be careful. And then it allows creation of records, right? So this one is always going to be empty, and then you create records and get the ID of the request back in that field. Okay, but all this is handled in the client script. But this is how we can create a related record without changing context, which makes it completely context-free. Okay, so if now I'm in context, which means I'm on the layout of data table. If I am on this dummy context, I can still create records in the data table. Right. I never create records here. Okay. Hmm?
1.2 seconds.
Yes. Yeah, I keep playing with this. I'm always surprised. Sometimes I spend days clicking on those buttons. No, but it's really such a big difference. Okay. If you have no further question or ideas, or of course I'm available at all daytime.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation.
Thank you.